Well, good morning, and thank you for joining our opening session here today. If you are here to learn a little bit about challenges and opportunities and translating some cell therapy innovation into viable clinical and commercial candidates through things like effective translation, but also scaling manufacturing, also recognizing some of the current volatility in the market, well, you're in the right place. So, we are going to talk about a little bit of a diversity of topics, primarily because, well, Wolfram and I were chuckling in one of the sessions earlier on yesterday because there's some recurring themes in these panels, so we wanted to make it a little bit different. So we will talk a bit about some of the market dynamics, whether the volatility is driven by investor hesitancy, geopolitical, kind of issues, or maybe even things like changing administrations, and with that, changes in policy. So we're going to be covering a lot of bases here today. I'm Betty Wu. I'm going to be serving as your moderator, and I'm joined by a diverse expert panel. If you don't mind, maybe I'll do a little bit of introductions, and feel free to, chime in anything that I don't answer. So I'm going to start with Brian. Brian comes to us from the University of California at San Francisco. Brian, like all of the panelists, carry a number of titles and responsibilities within respective institutions. Brian has contributed some seminal research in UCSF. He has been recently published in Nature Biotech, so we're really pleased to have him here. But I think that it's his role as lab director for UCSF Cellular Transplantation GMP facility that arguably may be the most relevant experience that you bring to the panel today. In that capacity, Brian integrates research, manufacturing, clinical teams in order to quickly advance the most promising clinical candidates to get to patients. So Brian had a snafu last night, so I'm really glad that he was able to travel here today. Jennifer MacDonald. So Jennifer is Chief Operating Officer for a nonprofit organization called Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, or ARMI, largely funded by the DoD, by the Department of Defense, correct? And also ARMI has a program called BioFabUSA that's really focused on process development, advanced biomanufacturing. I think Ned Gordon may or may not be in the audience, but really exciting program, and I think your perspectives are going to be very complementary to the panel. Dr. Wolfram Carius joins us today as a board member of BlueRock Therapeutics, but I also wanted to provide a little bit extra context. Wolfram recently stepped down from an executive vice president role with Bayer Pharmaceuticals. He was part of the executive committee, also headed up cell and gene therapy very recently. I think Wolfram also brings a very broad perspective. Actually, Wolfram and I met in discussions around the Berlin Center for Gene and Cell Therapies. So really, I can say that his insights maybe span incubator companies all the way to clinical translation and certainly commercialization, not only of cell and gene therapies, but other modalities as well. So welcome. And then finally, beside me is Jennifer Cannon. Jennifer is president of commercial operations for Thermo Fisher Scientific's pharmaceutical services business, also maybe more familiarly known as Patheon. Jennifer obviously brings a CDMO perspective, but I really value Jennifer's insights because she engages with so many innovator companies, from biotechnology companies all the way through mature pharmaceutical companies. So her voice carries a lot of weight because it really represents a broad part of the industry. I'm so really glad to have her point of view. Did I miss anything important?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to get started with an icebreaker question, and I'm maybe hearkening back. Oh, the title slide's not there. But dynamic markets is something that we wanted to lean into a little bit. So maybe for the icebreaker, given a lot of the volatility in the market, I'm wondering if each of you can comment on how, I'll say, market conditions over the past year have influenced you, your organizations. Maybe it's forced you to look at different strategic priorities, focus in on, really the most important ones commercially or of value to your clients. So hoping that you can provide a little bit of different perspectives from where you sit. So Brian, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. So we're in the academic setting, and so the commercial impact isn't usually direct. Most of our work is from grants and from donors, although a lot of the venture capital stuff trickles down. Thus far we've been okay, but I think all of the sources available to us are being hit hard at the same time, so it's challenging. At the same time, there are just incredible opportunities in the field in terms of the new tools and technologies and the types of products we can make. So, we're getting through it and hoping that pendulum swings back the other way, and some of these opportunities are able to break down those barriers before we all go up in flames.
Yeah, to the best of your ability, I don't know if you can comment, but I imagine that you have many translational programs from researchers that are bringing them forward within UCSF and seeking your kind of expertise. And have you rationalized some of those programs? Do you help the researchers kind of say, this one can wait 18 months, you really ought to move forward with that one due to market, due to COGS, due to any number of different factors? Just curious whether you can share, your rationalization process.
Sure, yeah. We get all types of products that people want to make, and usually we're pretty forgiving in the academic setting, willing to make the crazy stuff that no one else will if it pushes forward the science and the medicine. And I think we have pulled back on that a little bit, and more eager to do things that can leverage platforms that we've already developed. So it's had some impact in the short term now.
And we'll come to platforms in a little bit.
Yeah.
Jennifer MacDonald.
Yes, thank you so much, Betty. As you mentioned earlier, the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute is a nonprofit, public-private partnership, and that gives us the honor of being really on the same side of the table as the innovators we work with. We exist to see the innovators we work with succeed. We exist to see this industry succeed. And in a time of a high pace of change right now, that has caused us to focus with very intensive purpose on the next milestone that our innovators are seeking, and be creative in the way we deploy our resources such that they can reach those milestones. I think there's also, in this high pace of change, a keen emphasis from many of those we work with on trust, on that notion of common purpose. And that's something we think about and cultivate on an ongoing basis, on an everyday basis. But in this time of change, really emphasizing that we are in this with you. We are on that same side of the table. We are driving with common purpose toward that next milestone that you want to achieve, and then applying collective creativity to get that done. That has really blossomed in this time. And as you mentioned, Brian, I think it is a time where there are significant challenges, but also opportunities. And I think that common purpose can get those realized.
So a little bit challenged. So you can represent BlueRock, but you can also represent, your experiences as well with Bayer, and you maybe bring a slightly different perspective coming to us from Berlin and EMEA.
Yeah, I think the industry, in a positive sense, is at a turning point because we have now for several years, at least 3 years, we have one trend that the whole investment and availability of financial resources went down, and it is still extremely difficult to get money for early onboarding idea. On the other side, we have, and we all think very linear, but de facto, both biology and digital and AI is developing exponential. So we see exponential growth of knowledge versus this part of consolidation, which actually is a good thing. Of course not if you're short on money, but it's a good thing because those ideas were really going to be a breakthrough. The enormous learning of failures in the last 2, 3, 4 years help us to really accelerate in the entire industry, specifically on cell therapy, but also on gene therapy. And we see it in the higher maturity of gene therapy already. This will, I'm pretty sure, also come to cell therapy. Concretely for, and as they still us as at Bayer or BlueRock and also on the gene therapy side, of course, it's the same as for any market player. So we looked and focused the pipeline, which definitely was also healthy in the sense of what is possible to make versus, okay, what is really breakthrough? What does really make the difference? Because you go from treatment to potential curable approaches, and has also, thinking it from the back, a realistic chance to get commercially acceptance, also ethical acceptance, patient's acceptance to, okay, what is really the bottleneck where we need to finance it through. So with that, we focus, and I stop there, to our 2 phase 2, 3 Parkinson programs in gene and in cell therapy, our ophthalmology cell therapy product, and the ongoing phase 2 on the chronic heart failure, and scaling back, and you have seen the scaling back also in headcounts on the earlier pipeline. That will obviously not work forever because otherwise you dry it out. Yeah. But for the time being, I think it's the motto of the day for quite the next months.
Do you think that Pharma will wait for the funding to return before they turn around and start funding early innovation, or do you think Pharma will lead that, causing funding to be, pushed back into the industry? I'm curious, chicken or the egg,
I think this, Betty, that depends on the maturity of the technology and the product. Pharma is super conservative. I'm working 38 and a half years in pharma. I can put both hands on the table. So we wouldn't have invested also years ago in something super risky. Now with this trend, which I tried to explain, the de-risking proceeded quite a bit. So we see large pharma investing, in my opinion, heavily in a still very risky part of new modalities, while also keeping what you need to keep to fuel your pipeline in addition. So I'm pretty optimistic if you see the environment outside. Pharma will not shy away from these modalities in country, but if you have a certain proof of concept, if you have 2-3 year data in cell therapy as we have for that product, of course, the convincing arguments are stronger than if you come with an idea which has no proof of concept.
That's right, and certainly Tim Hunt's presentation yesterday, attesting to the top 20 pharma and investment. Exactly. I mean, that's a good leading indicator. Jennifer.
Good. I would say, well, we reach to globally large pharma to very small biotech. So high volume of insights from the markets. We're very privileged to partner with a lot of customers in a range of modalities and focus areas and size. And I think in general, we're hearing 2 main dynamics. One is the funding. How do I get to a milestone and gain that clinical readout faster so I can take decisions? And how can you partner with me as a supplier to take those decisions faster and accelerate through the clinical development journey? And from a cell therapy perspective, I think we're seeing this as well, pharma and biotech taking decisions in a little bit different way from a funding perspective. They're thinking about the end state much earlier on. So from a cost of goods, they're thinking about where the technologies are evolving. Some are working against them. It's a disadvantage. You're moving from an open system to a closed system. It's causing more costs. Others are benefits from an AI perspective and how we can streamline some of the data analytics. So we're trying to take those complexities together and partner with the biotech and pharma to de-risk this, but to also be thinking about the end state from a cost of goods perspective.
Great. Well, good icebreaker. We're going to get into some equally meaty topics. So we're switching gears to clinical translation. You know, as you just heard, there are different perspectives here depending on their institutions. So there will be some common denominators there in terms of challenges tied to effective clinical translation. So maybe I'll just ask the question, are there any common challenges you believe that may result in, I don't know, higher risk, higher costs, tied to that clinical translation process? So, you know, Brian, this is your sweet spot, right? So just
Sure, yeah. I'm sure we all have different perspectives here.
Yeah.
We are typically focused on an earlier stage of development, so something coming out of a research lab that you know, we're trying to get through a phase 1 trial, get that early clinical data that then makes it attractive. On one side, we're trying to create something that's new, which is complex, and make that adhere to the regulatory requirements. But then on the other side, the budgets are smaller, and the priorities for you know, an academic PI at this stage are usually just to get something to a successful IND and through that phase 1 trial. So they may not be willing to make some of the investments that you would make in the industry setting for, you know, process characterization and QC validation and various things you would do to sort of future-proof that so that you can successfully scale it to pivotal trials or commercial products. So, you know, that's an area where we're starting to run into challenges, particularly with some of the older products, some of which were just developed in someone's research lab. And they, you know, they built out their own GMP facility and started making it there. Now when those products are successful, sometimes curing patients, you still have to retrofit them to you know, the FDA requirements for a BLA. So that is, you know, that is a challenge we deal with constantly, how to balance resources and make the right amount of investment at an early stage while still, you know, keeping the costs low and making it fast to get through those trials.
Well, speaking of outsourcing, maybe I'll just skip to, you know, Jennifer Cannon here. As a CDMO partner, are there certain ways that you interact and support translational centers, et cetera? Bring a different perspective.
Yeah. So I think we work with a lot of very early academic, small biotech researchers. They come wanting support in developing their process and ensuring it's GMP ready. You may think that a certain process is GMP ready, and then once we get started and working together, it's not quite at that stage. And we rely heavily on our translational research teams in San Diego, where we have customers come in and they work with a range of different technologies. Some of them are Thermo Fisher, some are not. And that allows us to start thinking about what a rapid development framework structure might look like so that we can get them more GMP ready before they move into different sites within our network or into their own network. So we really try to build that trust and innovation very early on in advance. And so sometimes we don't have that notice. We interact with customers, again, that they've got some early data and they want to get into the clinic as soon as possible. And so that process development work has to move at a much greater speed. And so we're resourcing that a little bit better than what we used to do in the past.
We'll dig into this a little bit more later on in the panel, but again, depending on the client, I mean, speed to clinic is, you know, one really important aspect perhaps for some of the, you know, biotechnology folks that you deal with, whereas maybe some of the more mature might be really looking downstream at COGS and commercialization. So Wolfram, you look like you were going to say something.
No, I think a common pattern, what we see and what we try also, just to add to Jennifer, is the industry on the pharma side tries, meanwhile, in an approach to take the best of biotech and the best of pharma, which, to my experience, already starts with different vocabulary as well as different views on, as Brian said, the length of what success means. So I think two elements just to add very short. Like in the monoclonal antibodies 25 plus years ago, if there would not have been a certain standardization at a certain point of processes, that would not have been successful, full stop. I remember well when we started, for example, with antibodies or with end product concretely, it was various hundred thousands per gram, where you are at $60 today. So it's dramatic, not only because of the cost, but access, process standardization. The same happened in gene therapy. So we are far advanced, super advances. And cell therapy is still lacking. So we are still at the very beginning of that S-curve. And so we need platforms to have that. And in that role, CDMOs play a very important role because you see 50, 60, 80 products versus the originator sees a handful. Maybe we're lucky a bit more, but it's a huge difference because of the data and the availability of the experience. So that makes a big difference. But last point, you have also to look to the entire chain. Our experience in learning, and maybe that helps, biotech is, I would say, the majority of biotech is focused on what we would call drug substance. But that's only a very small part. It's a very complicated one in that modality, but it's a very small one. One of the biggest challenges we see are partially later in fill finish of a cell therapy. I just shared with Brian, we learned our lessons in that to get that to a really reproducible, secure process, and not to talk about devices. So this is far away from what normally biotech's turf is. So if you don't put that together, you see the surprises just later. So it's very important to think this value chain through. And again, also there, I think CDMOs play an important role.
I think that's a theme that's emerging, really. You know, it's not so much speed to clinic, but really looking longer term at commercialization.
Yes.
Jen, any specific examples or case studies that you can share where ARMI is really successfully taking like technology innovation and figured out how to scale it from a manufacturing point of view? I know automation's big, and we'll get to that, but just curious if you have any examples that you might want to share.
Yes, absolutely. And just to pick up on this point of that mindset of length of success and thinking about the entirety of the value chain, and just to connect that to what you were saying, Brian, we are seeing a lot of the same challenges that you described. We're seeing folks look over a more protracted timeline with the same amount of dollars and look to stretch those, and seeing conversations that center on what can be done just to get to that next milestone. Sometimes it's IND, sometimes it's pre-IND, sometimes it's an interact. But we're seeing folks focus on that immediacy, that next step, and even a reticence to have a conversation about what that entire chain looks like. But we're still engaging on that because we also see some innovators enter into those first steps. If they haven't thought through that entire chain, they'll make decisions in those early steps that prevent that entire chain from occurring. And Betty, to your question, that's exactly where ARMI centers. And a specific example recently is the way we work with condition advocacy communities. There's an important discussion on this yesterday, and one of the communities we work with is Breakthrough T1D, formerly the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And that organization came to ARMI, nonprofit to nonprofit, and said, you know, we are funding hundreds of researchers to differentiate iPSCs to pancreatic islets, and then, with the last 10% of their funding, roughly, begin their research. Can you please demonstrate the automated manufacture of starting materials by which they can begin their research with a standardized product at the same stage? And our funding can go to the research instead of the handmade manufacture, we'll call it, of their tools, their starting materials. And we thankfully have demonstrated that, validated in vivo, and now are about to launch distribution of automated manufactured islets to the range of Breakthrough T1D's researchers in the US and abroad. And importantly, that also gives us a platform by which, again, as a nonprofit, to engage the FDA on what's coming forward. Those products that will be distributed are for research use as a start, but we have the ability to engage FDA on what's coming forward. If that can be demonstrated with products for research use, of course that can be demonstrated for commercializable products. And so we are looking forward in the next couple of months to actually putting a scalable, modular, automated and closed manufacturing platform at the FDA by which their researchers, their regulatory scientists can engage with these platforms and understand the products that are coming racing through toward them. And just to close that loop, I think that piece of the conversation is what can unlock those conversations with folks who are really intent on making sure that their dollars stretch just to the next milestone. If they can see the entirety of that path, if they know it's possible, then that conversation is open, and we can get that end in mind thinking at the beginning.
Were you going to say something?
Well, I'll just make a counterpoint from that. It's not in disagreement with anything anyone's saying here, but I think from the academic perspective, the focus is really, or not always, on the ultimate commercial product. It's on pushing forward the science and the medicine. So if you spend 10 times as much so that you have a good commercial path, that's 10 products you could have made and seen if they worked or didn't. So I think that's a common perspective people have. Now, they also often don't care how you make the product. So if you come to them with a platform that you know can move forward commercial and say, just use this, it'll work for you now, it'll work for you later, I think that would be a very attractive solution, and hopefully we're moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So good segue into automation, right? So we all know that a key part of bridging the gap between discovery and real-world applications is, can we scale the science? But also with that comes, are we able to scale the process? And then automation becomes relevant. But, and I know Jason asked the question yesterday as well, but there's been some healthy debate on, when to apply, when to implement automation in the process. Some are really advocating as early as possible. Others kind of want to wait for cost reasons, for practicality reasons, taking some approaches and applying automation to certain unit operations that have a higher propensity to inconsistency, manual, et cetera. So there's lots of different ways to skin this cat, but I'm curious to get kind of some of the perspectives of you in terms of timing of innovation, or timing of automation. And I'm going to start with Wolfram here, and just wondering if you can share any key considerations or criteria that would lead you to apply automation earlier as opposed to later.
Yeah, I could fill the next half hour because that was such a discussion back and forth between pharma and biotech. I make it short. I think we learned some hard lessons on that, and so my first statement is we have to understand biology in cell therapy before you step into a pharma view where you say, okay, now we go to platform, we go to standardization, to whatever. That took a way back forward quite a time for us with the following result. First, we should not jump on automation when we have not really put up all the stones, and we detected a lot of things under the stones for quite a time, much longer than we thought, to be very clear. The second is we have meanwhile established what we would also call platform approaches, being analytics, being in the process, being in a fill finish, that we do not reinvent when the time is ready, and that I think is product specific, where you understood and you have a hopefully good correlation between your clinical and in vivo versus in vitro. So at that time, you tried not to just, let's say, apply what you have in reach or in mind, but say, look, if ever possible, we take that as at the standard. And that led us to a quite successful scaling meanwhile, and the key word which you used, Jennifer, is modular. So nobody is willing to pre-invest or should pre-invest millions at a time point where the risk is 90% plus, right? So the modularity being in what to apply, the capacity which go this way or that way. I've seen more than 30 launches with the teams I led, and the one thing in common, forecasts were never correct. Either dramatically too high, dramatically too low. So you have to have this flexibility also within the process, but modularity gives you the chance both sides go up, but also to scale down. Right. Now the automation for cell therapy for our lead product, which is in a phase 2, phase 3 to launch, is relatively high, but only after we have really went through any detail from the raw material, the cell bank, the entire processes. And I shared with Brian, more astonishing for us, it was not the differentiation, and on that part, it was a bit on the upstream, but it was relatively late, easy fill and finish, where we had the major challenges and even had to invent, and we are developing that also for open for others in the industry, a specific fill and finish machine, because nothing is really available at the moment which has exact that part of dosing for cells which we need. So it was, it was not an easy journey, and a lot of learning through the last, let's say, 2 years on that.
And Brian, I think Wolfram referenced you. Does that jive? Does that align with your thinking in terms of automation? Are you already thinking about that, even though you're a little bit earlier on?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with Wolfram here. Automation is great, can help standardize your product and give you more consistent quality and simplify the workflow. But in order for it to work, you have to know what you want the process to look like. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're locked into a process that doesn't make the product that you want. And in our setting, the tools and technologies are changing constantly. We almost never have the identical platform from one product to the next, and so we require that flexibility. So some of the more, full automation approaches just don't work for us. And so what we've landed on is the same thing Wolfram suggested, sort of modular, automated unit operations. So if we know, this is a common piece in all the products that we make, it makes sense to standardize that component, and then we could kind of mix and match those pieces together, still maintain a closed system for the most part, and then learn over time what will work best. I do think that, as the field matures, which it's starting to, some of these platforms will become more standardized, and we'll be more routinely doing the same thing over and over again. And then I think we will see automation creep earlier and earlier in the pipeline.
Agree. And from a CDMO perspective, I think you probably have the hardest job relative to automation, because everybody comes in with a different process, different ideas on where they want to automate or how they want to automate it. So how do you handle that?
Yep. Yeah, there's a big range, right, of our customers and partners that come in expecting to automate or desiring to automate much earlier on. And I know when we all met together, when we were talking about this topic, it was refreshing for me to hear the same range of reaction that you face. I think you're spot on, really, Brian, is that it's still such a new industry right now. And so we reinforce this with our customers that eventually we'll get to that phase with technology coming on board that allow early automation processes to be put in place. But what we typically do is we use a fit for purpose approach. And we look at the trade-offs, right, the risk reward. So if there are certain particular steps that allow for automation, that will improve the consistency, improve throughput, reduce the variability, but doesn't have a direct impact to the GMP compliance, then we'll put that in place early on, especially if something it means that it will prevent a next-gen process development that may have to be required later on in the clinic. So if we're really looking at the risk-reward and how we implement that in a phased approach. So we take steps like from a modular perspective of what we can implement without, to get the benefit of reproducibility and lack of, and reduce that variability without interfering with any of the compliance that is required to get through the clinic. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking right now, but it's always a very healthy debate with customers around when to implement the automation, because they're constantly thinking about their cost of goods. And so we try to offset that cost in different ways than always running to automation to gain that efficiency.
Right. Yep. Right. So many things to talk about here, but I'm going to move us on. I have to say I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that there was an announcement last week, a press release by Multiply Labs, where they announced an expansion of the collaboration with Thermo Fisher around the DynaSelect platform and automating it within the context of MLI's robotic platform. And as many of you may know, DynaSelect is a closed, automated, modular unit operation for isolation, activation, and bead removal. So definitely takes out some critical steps, manual steps in the process. And I would say that combined potentially with Rotea, which is already integrated within the MLI platform, really the combination of the wash concentrate with some of the activation really kind of represents, I think, a step forward in allowing some of that modular automation to happen. So we're really pleased that we're moving it forward. I wanted to end this automation piece with Jennifer MacDonald because, as you heard a little bit earlier, some really exciting work in collaboration with the FDA and getting some of their thoughts around automation and moving it closer to standards and harmonization. So Jennifer, is there anything else that you want to share about where you see, maybe even the timing of when you see automation hitting a little bit more of a mainstream audience within cell and gene therapies?
Yes, thank you, Betty. We are actually seeing this with a high degree of imminence. FDA is very actively engaging on this topic. To the point of now pulling automated platforms on site so that they can understand, familiarize, and be able to better enable novel technologies to come toward them and then to be evaluated and processed in a very timely manner. I want to pick up on a point, Wolfram and Brian, that you were making earlier too, and just the concept of knowing what the process is and then automating what you actually want to see happen instead of just automating for the sake of automation. And I just wanted to highlight that this has happened in other industries, including non-life science industries. And we're seeing that FDA, even on the life sciences side, is very aware of that. If we take a not quite adjacent example, for instance, of aeronautics or automotive manufacturing, the early software in those industries replicated human movements, including the flaws, right? There was a bit of automation for the sake of automation. And over time, that became much more purposeful. And to your point, Brian, there was a focus on what do we want the process to be? What is the actual objective and quality objective that we want to see achieved here? And then let's design the software, let's design the automation to achieve that. And I think our industry is going through that evolution now. And the more clarity with which we approach those design objectives, I think the more readily that FDA will engage.
Excellent. Again, good segue to maybe another related topic, and that's of platforms, right? So I think that, well, Peter Marks, huge proponent of platform approaches, ARM as well, really advocating for gene editing platform approaches. So, I think that there, like anything, are pros and cons associated. Is it too early to be thinking about platforms? But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on platforms, some of the trade-offs that you're considering, minimum requirements that you would expect from a cell therapy manufacturing platform. If you all or none of you want to comment on it, that's okay too, but I'm just curious if you have any perspectives on that.
Sure, I can go first. I mentioned briefly, we have a number of customers that do come in and think about their pipeline of therapies, not one particular one, and they regularly want to consider a platform approach. And it's the trade-off between having a structured, more rigid platform that doesn't always allow for the flexibility. And so what we've tried to develop here is this rapid development framework approach that puts enough standardization in place, but still allows for flexibility. So right now, it's compatible for allogeneic, autologous, non-viral, viral, a range of cell types. But we know we're going to constantly see this market evolve, and we know that that particular standardized framework has to evolve as well. So we've left some flexibility so that when certain processes come into place and we come across to our shop, that we're best prepared to develop that into a little bit more customized approach for our customers. And so that's what's kind of helped that discussion early on around platform. We know that we're going to require platform going forward, and we're just trying to strike that balance of structure and flexibility.
And I think we use the term platform pretty loosely.
Right.
It can mean a whole range of things, right? And when I think of the platform you described versus the gene editing platform, Prime, spoke yesterday, I think that probably it's deserving. So I don't know, how do you even define platform in your workspace, Brian?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it can mean a million different things, and generally, it's a group of steps that can achieve what you want them to across a range of different products, for example. And so those core steps have to be robust and reproducible for the things that you want to make. Jennifer, that was interesting to contrast it with automation, because the structure versus flexibility is somewhat the same. I think though, even in the academic setting, I lean more towards being in favor of platforms. In fact, I think they're going to be essential because of the costs that we face with developing these products. And a lot of those are fixed. It doesn't matter if you're making a treatment for one person or 1,000, you still have to go through these regulatory filings and all of the development work. Still have to get your vector, and all of that is the same. And so I think this is particularly bad for rare disease, and we do quite a few rare disease treatments, even down to N of 1 therapies, and it just becomes impossible to make those products one at a time. And so I think one way to deal with that is to combine multiple products, multiple indications into a common bucket so that you can divide those fixed costs up among a greater number. And that's what platforms allow you to do. So purely on the financial side, I think it's absolutely essential, unless you're making a blockbuster drug, and then maybe it doesn't matter.
Got it. Any other perspectives that you want to share?
I quickly can build on what Jennifer said. I think the aspect of platform needs to have a purpose. And the first purpose is safety. And the second is safety. And the third is safety. And then comes others like cost and so on. Yeah. Of course, a product cannot be viable because of cost, but if it's not safe, this is a much bigger problem. So the difference what I see in cell therapy versus gene therapy or monoclonal, what you have on other modalities is this technology is not in the stage that we fully understand what's really happening. It's living cells versus you have standard, let's say, ingredients on other. So I think it's still in the phase where, you don't want to put it on a platform, as you also said, and go with it, but it doesn't really serve the purpose on the biology, or is serving it partially, and you reduce cost of goods of, I don't know, 20%, but it's still outrageous expensive. So you probably invest more early in the innovation part and have, for example, less and really safe and potent and efficient cells. And then at a stage, you go for a certain automation and also reduce, therefore, significant cost of goods. So I just want to make the point, it needs to be a balance, and only those who develop the process can finally decide on when the right time is to apply a platform versus really understand how the biology really works.
And just building on that for a moment, one of the considerations that we think deeply about when it comes to platforms, and really, again, to this point of thinking through what is the specific objective to be achieved, is scale. It's a very different consideration, and Jennifer, to your earlier point about flexibility too, the flexibility and modularity that you need to, for instance, address the forward path for an autologous bone product versus a blood product that will compete with a unit of blood that has 2 trillion cells per unit is a very different set of considerations. And the platform ideally will lend to the delivery mechanism as well. Thinking about scale and thinking about whether that scale for that product implies centralized or distributed manufacturing is a key consideration in the platforms we work with. And again, just Betty, back to your earlier question as well, a key consideration as FDA considers how these products come forward and how they will be delivered safely to the clinical endpoint.
Got it. So a bunch of questions I would love to ask. The panel agreed to take questions from the audience, so think about your questions, and I'll come back to you maybe after a final round. We're open to that. I'm gonna skip over some areas and maybe get to a little bit of cross-sector collaboration, right? So we have a diverse panel here today. We collaborate, I think, not ideally. We're not at the ideal state yet, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think cell and gene therapies have really forced a more collaborative engagement across academia, biotech, biopharma, health systems, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think that Brian, UCSF has been a collaborator not only for Thermo Fisher Scientific, but many, many partners out there. And I'm wondering if you can talk about opportunities that you see, maybe challenges that UCSF finds as a leading institution in engaging in collaborations with industry, with other academic institutions. Is there something that you want to highlight?
Sure, yeah. We have so many great collaborations, and it's absolutely essential for us. It's sort of a unique situation in cell and gene therapy for an academic group to be making drugs. I don't think that's something that really exists in other areas. And, we can offer a lot of things, but we can't do the complete package. So on the academic side, constant supply of cool new research ideas, new drug products. We move a lot of different therapies through our program, so we have pretty continuous regulatory interactions. We publish, we're very open about our stuff, so that there's opportunities for publicity. Yeah. On the other side, we don't have the resources to, do everything that's needed to bring a drug forward. We can't make the equipment that's required, many of the, custom GMP materials, a million things, really, where it's just, we don't have the resources to do it ourselves. So in order to make this work, we have to collaborate, and I do think it's a win-win for both sides, which is nice. I think it's a win for the field, too, because we work together to push forward cool new products, and yeah, we're going to keep doing that, so.
Great.
It's been great.
I'm going to put you to the test, Wolfram. I know we have limited time, but from a public-private partnership perspective, what you've been kind of in the middle of with respect to the states of Berlin, Germany, Charité, Bayer. I mean, it's been an incredible ecosystem that has been a long time in the making, but it's starting to get some traction. So I'm wondering if you can maybe share a little bit about that ecosystem that you've created. Let
me start just with one statement. I think specifically in US, you don't see how good it works. You look to Europe and see how difficult it is. So keep what you have. That's a really important environment. It's not by chance that, for example, for Bayer, we have our both units in US. And one reason is that this key component of translation is one of the dramatically missing link still in Europe. On the monoclonal side, it worked meanwhile, but on the part of cell and gene therapy, we are still struggling. This is the reason why actually after COVID, where we all think had a bit our experiences and how the world cooperates or doesn't cooperate and how that all needs to be better to work together. The German government also saw, and we made that very transparent, that there needs to be a better collaboration between fundamental research, the development support you both also represent, and the part of the pharmaceutical industry, which is around in Europe, and I don't say even Germany, in Europe. The fact is that most of the real good, brilliant ideas, being on a National Cancer Institute or what, are developed in US to then years later come back into Europe, which is difficult to understand also financially, right? So that point is that it is focused, so on both ends of the value chain, specifically at the beginning, collaboration with academics, hospital, private institution, which work like yourself, are absolutely key for success of the area. And we at Bayer, we don't want to be here doing that for Bayer, but more sponsoring it and putting the industry experience into it, because in contrary to US, in Europe, most, not all, but most institutions on the academic side are really on the public and the publishing side and not on the product-specific development side. And some have very good examples for the opposite, but we have to join forces, and it's not a German topic, it's the same in Netherlands, in UK, big advances, but still didn't make the breakthrough. That is what we want to put together. And the best thing is to do that you have centers of competence where you have critical mass, and that is what we have in Berlin. So it's in front of Bayer, but it's in front of Charité, it's in front of the institutes like Max Planck Institute or others, Helmholtz. So everything is in about 300 to maximum 350 meters walking distance.
Yeah. Proximity matters.
People really also meet, and that's the intention. Let's see, it took, as you said, quite a time, but with so many different players, with different interests and changing governments and all that. And you know here also in US what that means, but it's not so different in Germany too.
Thanks, very good. Any questions from the audience? No? Well, I think that, oh, did I hear? Yeah, please.
I had a question about the Right to Try Act that was just announced. Like, how does that impact developers and manufacturers? I hope you heard me, but I was just wondering with the Right to Try Act, how does that impact developers and manufacturers?
Anybody want to take that?
Happy to chime in for a moment. I think it's a really important and a really interesting question. And in short, I think this remains to be seen. My understanding of the impetus behind the efforts in this direction are really a desire for broader access to what's coming forward. And I think it's very important that that be balanced with the rigorous application of science that keeps access to novel technologies safe, to your earlier point. I think this is a balance that we will need to wrestle with, including as more automation is applied, including as FDA makes these pathways and advancements of these technologies faster. And I think that what we're seeing from the nonprofit perspective is that FDA is actively engaged on this, that our federal partners are actively engaged on that thinking about balance of safety and access. And I think it'll be incumbent upon us as industry members, as folks working in this space, aiming to see not just technologies developed for the sake of the breakthroughs, but technologies brought forward all the way into meaningful efficacy in the lives of patients and families, that we preserve that balance very actively. I think this is a topic that is likely to gain traction in the next little while. And again, that we will need to think deeply about as it applies to each of our own spaces. A lot remains to be seen, but I think that's a healthy balance we can keep.
Thanks for the question. Any other questions? If not, I think we're ending right on time.
I could add one aspect.
Please, go for it.
And just for considerations, because that was a discussion we have had some years, 1.5 years ago with Peter Marks also. I mean, we should, and I 150% subscribe to what you said.
Well said.
Really.
Yeah.
But the other part is also we have to consider and have also the courage to revisit the systems we established for years. And we have seen, as the industry learned, in mouse you get nearly everything to work. So what does it really mean along the entire chain? So the regulatory approval process, and there were some very prominent, very intelligent proposals on the table, specifically for those areas of small population need to be rethought. Because, maybe I throw the word conditional approval or something like that, but there needs to be this balance which you pointed out. It's definitely different for prevalent large diseases because the impact you might have on the negative side on the safety might be massive. But on the other side, that the regulatory limits the access to where people absolutely need this product is something which constrains us in Europe as well as in the US.
Yes.
And I don't want to loosen anything, but I think we should also be pragmatic. I just wanted to add that to your question, and that will help also to get access beyond. We're talking Europe and US, but the majority of the population in the world doesn't live there. So we have to bring those products much faster also to other areas of the world.
Yeah, maybe I'll pile on here to just to emphasize some of those points. And I'm not familiar with the changes in the Right to Try Act, so not speaking to that directly, but conceptually, particularly on the clinical side, it's heartbreaking to see a situation where you know the risk-benefit is there, right? Like this is a patient with no hope, and you can give them a treatment that might actually help them, but it's just impossible. And, you know, technically it's possible, right? We could do it in a research lab in a day, but you know, the regulatory hurdles are insurmountable. So I do think that is something we need to think about, and you know, the one-size-fits-all regulatory approach might not be appropriate for some of these different types of therapies.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you to a wonderful, engaging panel. I hope you all have a good rest of your meeting.